I'm Kate, a 28-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, David, and we don't have children. I work at a publishing house, specifically in sales, promoting our company's books. It wasn't the department I had hoped for, and it was stressful, but I managed my daily work. My husband, David, worked at one of the sales destinations. When I first went there for sales, "You have a tough job, don't you?" he said, and I inadvertently ended up venting about my work frustrations. David listened without showing any sign of annoyance. As we saw each other often on my sales visits, we grew close and started dating. David was kind and caring, always willing to listen to my work troubles even after we got together. Being with David made me forget about the daily nuisances. After about a year of dating, he proposed me, and we decided to get married. However, a while after getting married, I fell ill due to work stress. I felt I should go to work, but I just couldn't get myself out of bed. It turned out to be a mental illness, and there were many days I couldn't go to work. I couldn't burden the company any longer, and with David saying, "I'll support you, it's going to be all right," I decided to quit my job. "I knew you were struggling with work. I'm sorry I didn't realize sooner." As he said so, I burst into tears. I was grateful for being married to him. However, living on just David's income made us anxious about our future. Even a part-time job would have helped, but at that stage, I didn't have the confidence to work. That's when we received news. My grandmother, whose legs had weakened, felt uneasy living alone and decided to move in with my parents. My grandfather had passed away a few years earlier. They lived in a 2-story house, which was too big for my grandmother, especially since she barely used the upper floor. She also decided to stop driving. Knowing about my health and job situation, my grandmother offered to give us her house and car. The house, recently renovated, was beautiful, and the car, a nearly new vehicle bought just before my grandfather passed, was in excellent condition with low mileage. They had bought it outright, so there was no loan for us to worry about. Considering our situation, we gratefully accepted her offer. Getting a house and a car in that time was a surprise, and he was extremely delighted. Eventually, I became a full-time homemaker, still not fully recovered. I planned to focus on homemaking until my health stabilized, then I consider return to work. I wanted to do housework perfectly, but my health didn't recover quickly, and sometimes I couldn't manage it well. There was a time when I spent entirely in bed. Even though we had a house and a car, we still relied on his income and lived frugally. Initially, he was as kind as ever. When I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do the housework perfectly even though I'm at home." "It's okay, don't push yourself." That's what he said. He would even cook meals for both of us and do the housework, despite being tired from work. I felt terribly guilty. However, as time went by, his frustration seemed to grow due to our constrained lifestyle and my inability to do much housework. He started to become harsher with me. One day, during a minor argument, he yelled, "You couldn't even live without my income." The part one was most concerned about, I never imagined kind David would say such a thing to me, and I was left speechless. Until now, he would say, "Don't worry about it." But to think he felt this way inside was a shock to me. From then on, David, perhaps thinking I couldn't retort in my current state, started to behave as he pleased. Even though we were barely making ends meet with the living expenses he had been contributing, he began to contribute even less. When I asked why he wasn't contributing to the living expenses, he said, "You're not savvy enough with saving. That's why I'm putting in less intentionally, to make you practice saving." There was no way the living expenses were enough, so I tried harder than ever to save, but it was no use. When even the food budget became insufficient, I pleaded with him to increase the living expenses. I asked, "Hey, the food budget isn't enough. Can you increase the living expenses, please?" But he replied, "Stop nagging, like I said before, you're just not clever enough. I'm forgoing things I enjoy just to contribute to the living expenses." I continued to argue, as there were parts one couldn't accept. But David, you go out drinking with colleagues and on your days off, don't you? I can't go anywhere, and I haven't bought clothes for myself in so long. David was unyielding. A person who doesn't contribute income and uses poor health as an excuse to laze around at home doesn't have the right to buy whatever they want. Be grateful I'm even contributing to the living expenses. If you're so upset, get a job and buy whatever you want. Though, that's probably impossible. He continued in this manner. Following this, whenever I tried to argue or give my opinion, he would reduce the living expenses, and I became more and more unable to talk back to him. Moreover, he started coming home later than before, or not until the morning. One day, when I confronted him about infidelity, he brazenly said, "So what if I am?" And he threatened me. "If you have a problem, we can just get divorced." Indeed, a divorce would leave me struggling to live. I couldn't go back to my parents' house as my grandmother was living there, and they had no room for me. David knew this and used it to his advantage. Each time he dangled divorce over my head, I would fall silent, and he became even more brazen, no longer hiding his infidelity. Whenever I looked displeased, he would mock like, "What? You want a divorce?" Another day, I asked him, "Sorry, I need some money for the doctor today." David answered with an annoyed expression. "Again? How much is it this time?" "I need to get some more medication, so about $50. I replied hesitantly. "Seriously? What a waste. I work hard for this money, and it's being taken for some mental illness, $50 at a time. Mental illness is all in your head anyway. I bet you're just using my money to enjoy a fancy lunch or something," he loudly exclaimed. I naturally objected. "That's not true. And whenever I go to the doctor, you always demand the receipt and insist on getting back every cent in change. How could I possibly use it for myself?" To which he retorted, "You're really good at talking back for someone who's useless. I'm letting you use my money to go to the doctor, so it's only right I get the change back. You waste money on unnecessary medical expenses and now you're asking for the change too? You're so greedy." He then grudgingly threw the doctor's fee on the floor. I picked up the money in silence, feeling my love for him growing colder. In such circumstances, my mental health couldn't possibly improve. These painful days continued, and the only outlet I had was writing about my struggles on my blog. Then, a decisive event occurred. One morning when I woke up, I couldn't find David anywhere. On the desk, there was a note saying, "I'll be away from home for about a week. Left $30 for a week's living expenses." In a panic, I called David. "Where are you? You're not going to be away for a week for work, right? Are you with another woman again? And how can $30 be enough for a week's living expenses? What are you thinking?" I confronted him. To which David replied, "Stop nagging. It's a vacation, a break. Anyone would be stressed with a do-nothing, complaining woman at home. And to think you, who receives the money, dares to complain it's not enough. Be grateful I left any money." He said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then he blocked my calls, and for the rest of the day, he didn't respond to any of my attempts to contact him. Feeling utterly hopeless, I received a call from David the next day. David said, "I forgot to say this yesterday, but I'm sick and tired of you. It's over, we're getting a divorce. I'm giving your car to another woman, so leave the house immediately. Have your things packed before I return and don't you dare show your face to me again." I was so shocked that I asked him to repeat himself. "What? What are you talking about all of a sudden? I don't understand. And giving away my car and telling me to leave the house. Isn't this house and car originally my grandma's?" David retorted, "They're mine too since you received them. I can do whatever I want with my own things. And if you're going to talk about money, consider the cost of the house and car as repayment for all the times I've supported you. If you don't like it, pay back all the living expenses I've put into this house at once. Can't do it, right?" pack your things and get out before I return. And fill out the divorce papers yourself. After ranting, he blocked my calls again. I had reached my breaking point. So, I decided to take a certain action. 2 days later, he contacted me. Have you left the house and the car yet? If not, hurry up. I replied cheerfully. Yeah, I've already moved out. Good. My girlfriend and I will be living in that house from now on, he said with a happy tone. However, unfortunately, that's not going to be possible. When he heard my response, he fell silent for a moment. What are you talking about? Are you not only mentally ill but also lost your mind? I stood my ground. No, I'm perfectly sane. And the house and car you're planning to use with your girlfriend are no longer available. I told him clearly. He yelled even louder. What do you mean? The house and car were originally my grandma's. So, I consulted with my grandma and decided to sell both the house and the car. The car is already gone, and while the house still exists, you have no right to use it. I explained calmly. That's right. While David was enjoying his affair trip, I couldn't bear it anymore and talked to my grandmother and parents about everything. Until now, I hadn't consulted them because I had quit my job due to illness and didn't want to cause any more trouble. My grandma asked, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" And my dad said, "Don't worry about not having a place to stay. We can prepare a place for you to stay. It's a parent's duty to help their child in a pinch." My mom agreed. And I broke down in tears as the burden I had been carrying was finally lifted. Together, we decided to carry out our plan. First, I decided to temporarily move my belongings to the house where my parents and grandmother lived together. I had very few possessions, as I rarely had the opportunity to buy things for myself. On top of that, the house and car my grandmother had given me were still in her name, so I decided to sell them with her permission. Fortunately, both the house and car were in good condition and quickly found buyers. David, with a voice trembling in anger, said, "You're doing whatever you want. What are you thinking?" Well, it's Grandma's right to do whatever she wants with her stuff. But as you wish, we'll get divorced. Of course, I'll make sure you pay the compensation. I replied unfazed. After a moment. Compensation? Why should I have to pay something like that? David exclaimed. It's obvious since you're at fault. You thought I couldn't talk back, so you didn't even try to hide your affairs, making it really easy for me to gather evidence. Thanks for that. It looks like there were several, including some married ones. Let's talk through lawyers from now on. I calmly answered. David was speechless for a while, not expecting such a counterattack from me. As the silence continued, I said, "Well then," and was about to hang up the phone. But what about your future life? You said there's no room for you in the house where your parents and grandma live. And if you sell the car, what about transportation? David retorted. I replied, "Oh, don't worry about that. My stuff is at my parents' place for now, but I've already found an apartment to rent. It's in a location with good transport, so I don't need a car." Then he asked, "How do you have money for that? You haven't been working. Our savings must have dwindled during the time I didn't give you money, right?" I told him in a cool voice. "So you knew that and still treated me like that. You're the worst. By the way, what you did was completely economic abuse. I'll add that to the compensation." David raised his voice even more. Economic abuse? What's that? I was providing for the household, so that can't be it. I replied exasperated. You really don't know anything, David. Economic abuse includes giving less than the necessary amount for living expenses. It also includes extreme restrictions on how I use my money and spending despite my requests to stop. Thankfully, you were kind enough to send me those instructions in messages and notes, so they're all evidence. I've also been keeping a detailed household ledger and diary. David muttered. What's that? Then I continued. And don't worry about my future life. I'm about to receive about 3 times your annual salary soon. Until then, I'll borrow money from my parents. David said, and lost his words again. In fact, I had been writing 3 blogs daily about my painful illness, my husband's emotional abuse, and about saving money. I always loved writing, and since I spent a lot of time at home due to poor health, I used to write in bed to somehow relieve my stress. Surprisingly, all 3 of my blogs became popular and their viewer kept increasing. I was then able to earn income through blogging, such as affiliate marketing. Unbelievably, I got offers to publish books based on all 3 blogs. There was a time lag before I could receive this income, but I had finally made arrangements for the money to be transferred, which allowed me to take this bold step. It was more like enduring until that income arrived. Furthermore, I had originally worked at a publishing company because I had a dream of becoming a novelist. I wanted to do any job related to writing. After receiving the book deal, I also got an offer to write a novel series. When I told him about this, he seemed even more shocked. It was natural, perhaps, as he never thought I could retaliate like this, especially losing to me in terms of income, which he thought he controlled. He exclaimed, "But if you have that much income, you don't need compensation from me. Are you saying I should lose my house, car, and family? You're the worst. Don't you feel like supporting me with that income in the future?" He was still making a fuss. Finally, I said, "That's a different matter. So, this is really goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your affair trips." And this time, I really hung up the phone. After that incident, I spoke with a lawyer and was able to get compensation from him. As I had told him, there was enough evidence of his affairs, emotional abuse, and economic abuse, so I received a significantly higher compensation than usual. He had little savings left, as he had been giving all the remaining money after minimal living expenses to his mistresses. He used to say to her, "If you come with me, I'll have a house and I'll give you a car." His mistresses easily abandoned him once they realized he no longer had a house or car, which he had promised to them. According to what I heard through the lawyer, David is now leading a very difficult life, without a house or car, and with the additional burden of paying the compensation. He's still trying to negotiate a reduction in the compensation amount, which is just ridiculous. Currently, he's renting a place by borrowing money and can't make ends meet with his current income, so he's also doing part-time jobs along with his regular work. Later, through the lawyer, he said, "I want to get back together. Let's marry again." But of course, I declined. Now, I live as a writer, my original dream. Initially, I was financially supported by my parents and grandmother, but I have paid them back. I'm now thinking about building a barrier-free house to live with my parents and grandmother in the future. After covering my son Paul's wedding costs. Why only $10,000 for your son's big day? If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount. Right after that, my husband Donald, who had never yelled before. "Shut up, kid. What? Just $10,000? For my wedding party, that's it?" My son, whom I've cherished more than my life, started laughing as if mocking us. "If you're the parent, pay the full amount. Poor thing." Is this really my son? After divorcing my ex-husband, who was drunk and harmful, I remarried Donald, and we've been happily living as a family of 3. Gentle and kind Donald warmly and strictly raised Paul, who was not his blood-related son. To anyone looking, they were father and son, very close. Like his father, my son grew into a kind and gentle boy and successfully became independent as an adult. Living together since his marriage, the life of just the 2 of us after our son left felt somehow fresh. While enjoying a calm life, suddenly, we got the news that our son had married. It was so sudden and, moreover, we were informed after the fact. Though surprised, we accepted it since he was an adult, but his wife seemed to come from a wealthy family. But that's not what concerned me about her. To put it nicely, she's outspoken and unafraid to speak her mind. To put it poorly, she's insensitive and blunt. Perhaps her personality has influenced my son. As far as I knew, my son was not the type to act that way even after receiving money. He was not the kind of child who would disdainfully call his parents poor. Shock and surprise made my mind go blank. Is this person really my son? I'd rather be told he's just a stranger who happens to look like me. It would be easier on my heart. At that moment, a loud bang echoed as the table was struck, and my usually calm husband erupted in anger. "Shut up, kid!" His eyes were filled with a contempt and anger I had never seen before. Mary got married at the age of 25. Soon after getting married, we were blessed with a child, and I raised our child as a housewife. It was when our son Paul was 1 year old that I divorced my previous husband, Robert. "It's Mary's fault for making me angry. Cut it out already." When drunk, he would curse at me like that, punching and kicking around the house, throwing things. His bad drinking habit seemed to worsen day by day, and it seemed he was becoming more intolerant to alcohol. In addition to yelling loudly, he seemed to throw things to further intimidate me, and there were times when I was hit and injured. Even then, "Can't you even dodge? It's not my fault." Once, he threw a glass at me while I was holding our son. I instinctively shielded my son. The glass hit my temple and broke. That was when I decided to divorce, fearing that Paul might get injured someday. Robert's drinking problem was only getting worse, and I couldn't guarantee that something life-threatening wouldn't happen someday. I was determined to protect my son, but if something were to happen to me while we were still married, this man would become the guardian of my son. I couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't commit a life-threatening assault. I had to avoid such a terrifying scenario at all costs. So, bleeding from my head, I rushed to the hospital open at night, holding my son, and had them make a medical certificate. We discussed the situation further at the hospital and decided to have them contact the authorities on our behalf. This action officially recognized my son and me as victims of abuse and successfully introduced a third party between Robert and me. Robert was very charming in public, always acting like the perfect husband whenever anyone else was around, especially when he wasn't drinking. That's why it was crucial to have an outsider involved. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. Robert said, "I was just sad that Mary stopped prioritizing me after our child was born. But it just showed how self-centered he was, a disappointment to the end." He only made the first payment for the settlement and child support, which was a few $100s, and then stopped. I tried to follow up initially, but after he started avoiding me and reacting angrily, I gave up. I never really had high hopes to begin with. After the divorce, I approached the company I worked for before getting pregnant, explained my situation, and asked if they could rehire me, and they did. So, I managed to secure enough income to keep us from poverty. What's important is spending time with my son and staying healthy enough to continue working. To do that, I knew I needed to eliminate stress from my life. I want to live with Mary and Paul. The person who stood by me through these trying times was Donald, who joined the company after I had left. I couldn't believe a man in his mid-20s, for years younger than me, with no history of divorce or children, would say such a thing to someone like me. "I want to date you, Mary, but I also want to get married soon." "You shouldn't speak so lightly of marriage." At first, I couldn't trust Donald. I thought his youth meant he had an idealized view of marriage and wasn't thinking it through. For someone who had already failed at marriage once, those were not the words I wanted to hear. "When we get married, we can always be together, and we can share the chores and take care of Paul together," right? Plus, to truly become Paul's father, I need to marry first. Is it to become Paul's father? Of course, I love you, Mary, but I also think of marrying both you and Paul. I was at a loss for words. I hadn't thought he felt that way. Was he serious? I want to share the same responsibility for Paul. I think that's what it means to stand by you, Mary. And I hope to be included as well. Seeing him smile, I felt the ice around my heart begin to melt. Donald always considered me and Paul together. He never just asked me out for a meal after work. Instead, he would offer to help carry groceries and even bring them to our apartment. Lately, when I had to leave work early because I wasn't feeling well, I'll pick up Paul from preschool on my way back from my rounds, so please call the preschool, he'd say, and he'd even bring back dinner for Paul and me. Paul was very fond of Donald, and seeing them laugh together made me happy too. By marrying, I gain a lot of rights. To be a husband, a father, a family member. So, please marry me, for my sake. I knew he phrased it that way so as not to burden me, but hearing him say it made me very happy. So, when Paul turned 3, Paul and I decided to remarry Donald. Even though there was no blood relation, Donald and Paul had a close father-son bond. We never told Paul they weren't blood-related. It wasn't that we tried to hide it, there just never seemed to be a need or an opportunity to mention it. Because to us, they were undoubtedly father and son. Because they were unmistakably father and son. Donald gave Paul both kindness and strictness. Our household gained another earner, which brought us a bit of financial leeway, allowing us to build a respectable house, though not a mansion. Paul grew up healthy without major illnesses, went to college, became a working adult, and now he has moved out and is living on his own. Currently, Donald and I live together in this house, working. This is the first time we've lived just the two of us since we met, and it feels a bit odd, but I think spending time together leisurely isn't too bad. It's been a few years since our son Paul started working. One day, out of the blue, we got a message. I got married. I'll come over with my wife this weekend. It was quite the surprising news. We hadn't even heard he was dating anyone, and now he's married. He mentioned they are planning a party and will set a date once everything is decided. Well, he's an adult now, so as long as he takes responsibility for his decisions, that's fine, but getting married without any prior notice was indeed a shock. I wondered if there was some urgent reason, like a pregnancy, but that wasn't the case. Our son has always been a bright and kind boy since childhood. Though he had his moments of rebellion, he was always able to reflect on his actions, so he never really behaved too badly. There was never any cooling of relations within the family, and even after he became independent, he frequently came home to share meals just like before. So, Donald and I were both puzzled by this sudden announcement of marriage. Welcome back, Paul. I'm home. This is my wife, Jessica. On the weekend, Paul came home with his wife. The woman named Jessica, standing next to Paul, smiled and nodded slightly. She was slim, with a gentle demeanor, very beautiful. Please come in. I called out to Paul and Jessica, and they entered the room, following Donald down the hallway. I ended up bringing up the rear, but noticed Jessica scanning the house as she moved. Though she followed behind Paul, her gaze flitted restlessly to the stairs and closed doors, and this behavior didn't change even after entering the living room. It was strangely unsettling to watch someone scrutinize another's home so openly, and my curiosity was as piqued as my discomfort. What kind of person was this woman? We sat down at the dining room table to talk. Paul mentioned that Jessica was 2 years his junior and a newcomer who had joined the company this spring. Being 25, she might have transferred from another company. Jessica's parents are well-known corporate chairpersons, and she grew up in a home always attended by housemaids, who took care of everything for her. In other words, she came from wealth. This information all came from Paul, while Jessica sat quietly beside him, not uttering a single word. Would you prefer coffee or tea? What kind of work do you do at the company? I hear you're thinking of having a party. Any preferences for the venue or theme? Even when asked such questions, Jessica would just cover her mouth and whisper to Paul. He would answer on her behalf, and Jessica would smile with narrowed eyes. It was incredibly frustrating. Jessica, I know we've just met and you might be hesitant, but feel free to speak up, okay? Donald must have felt the same way. Unable to hold back, he said this, but Jessica remained silent, just smiling with her mouth covered. The pattern of Paul speaking for her continued. We're just here to report today. And they left rather quickly, without us ever hearing Jessica's voice. It's just, well. After the two left, Donald and I could only look at each other and mutter. Are young people these days really like that? No, even the new employees at the company aren't like that. They don't even introduce themselves. They don't make proper eye contact. Not a word of greeting or thanks. Yet, they unabashedly stare around the house, and when we give them a parting gift, they don't say thank you, nor do they feel ashamed for coming empty-handed. It's really strange. Feels like meeting aliens. In any case, the sense of discomfort is very strong. If they're married, all the more reason. It's another household, after all. If Paul and his partner manage on their own, that's all that matters. I think so too. Maybe just keeping in touch to a reasonable extent is best? Donald seemed to feel the same way. He says with a wry smile. Neither of us wants to live together, nor do we have a strict view about our son's wife. So, we both thought that meeting up occasionally would be just right for both parties. That's what I thought, but for some reason, Paul started coming home frequently with Jessica. Maybe because they don't live far away, so it's an easy trip. However, Jessica still doesn't speak a word. Even if I ask something, she whispers to Paul, and Paul answers. Naturally, the conversation doesn't get lively, but the frequency of them having dinner at our place or staying over has increased, and honestly, it's nothing but stress. Today, while I was preparing dinner, I got a message from Paul saying, "We're coming over." Given the timing, I had no choice but to ask if they were planning to have dinner, and of course, the answer came back as if it was expected. Paul and Jessica stay holed up in Paul's room upstairs, not helping with the preparations. Ever since he was young, Paul was always eager to help me with meal prep. Now that he doesn't, it feels bittersweet. I'll go call Paul and the others. After getting help from Donald to get dinner ready, I decided to go upstairs to call the two of them. I really wonder about this. As I went up the stairs, I could hear a voice. Not Paul's voice. A woman's voice I hadn't heard before, so it must be Jessica. This was the first time I heard her speak. Isn't this too old-fashioned? Is this house secondhand? No, it's not. Your father and mother are so plain, and both the house and the people seem poor. It's depressing. My first thought was, so this is her true nature. Though I was infuriated by her rude remarks and scornful complaints, it felt like the unease I had been feeling deep down was finally clear. If you don't cut ties with such an old-fashioned family home, it's divorce for us. Yeah, I'll think about it. Afterwards, I casually found the right moment to call out from outside the room, and the four of us spent a dinner time that wasn't as lively as usual, with Paul and Jessica just eating before leaving. Sigh. I'm disappointed in Jessica's personality and Paul's lack of judgment, But what irritates me the most is Paul saying he'll think about it after being told it's divorce unless he cuts ties. Over post-dinner coffee, just Donald and I shared exactly what I had overheard before dinner. I'm mad at Jessica for casually throwing around the word divorce, and at Paul for considering cutting off his parents and his childhood home. Easy now. Let's calm down a bit. As my anger slowly grew with time, Donald tried to soothe me by stroking my back. Putting his wife first isn't a bad thing for a husband to do. I guess so. They're young, so maybe they can only see things from their perspective right now. Let's wait and see a bit longer. True, considering they're newlyweds. Jessica is young and was raised in a wealthy family. I'm disappointed Paul chose someone like her, but it's fine. Paul's life is his own. After all, even if we're family, we're different people. It wouldn't be strange for our paths to diverge. That's an extreme view, but if it comes to that, we can't do much. Paul is kind at heart, and maybe he'll manage to bridge the gap between Jessica and us. Donald's faith in Paul was evident. Raised by the ever-calm Donald, who never resorted to unjust anger or raised his voice, Paul had grown into a considerate and gentle young man. I trusted him too, but couldn't shake off a feeling of unease about what lay ahead. We've decided on the details for the party. Want to talk about it tomorrow? So, as usual, Donald and I welcomed Paul and Jessica into our home. We sat at the dining table, and as usual, only Paul spoke. Paul, this. I placed an envelope filled with cash on the table in front of Paul. Use this for the wedding party expenses. This money had been saved since my divorce. With a determination to protect Paul no matter what came our way, even if it meant saving little by little for him. Donald knew about this savings account, and since our remarriage, had suggested we contribute a fixed amount monthly. We had already taken out insurance for Paul at the time of our remarriage and were making monthly payments. This savings was partly for my own satisfaction, funded from money I could spare, so there were times I couldn't contribute. Still, we had reached our goal of $10,000. That's why I thought it was the right time to give it to Paul. Paul took the envelope, opened it, and looked inside. For my son's big day, just $10,000? Those were Paul's words. Jessica leaned over to peek inside. If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount, poor thing. Paul sneered mockingly, his mouth twisting unpleasantly, with Jessica making a similar face beside him. My mind went blank. Is this really my son before me? I didn't expect tears of joy, but I hoped it would be helpful for Paul. Shut up, kid. A loud bang on the table and a shout. It was Donald. Both Paul and Jessica were startled, frozen in shock, but so was I. Donald had never raised his voice like this before. Now's a good time to say this. Paul and I have no blood relation. Huh? Paul's surprised voice echoed. It made sense he'd react that way. We had never mentioned it before, and I hadn't expected Donald to reveal it at such a moment. Paul has been with us since he was 2 years old, and when he turned 3, Mary and I remarried, making Paul officially part of the family. Paul was at a loss for words. Mary divorced her ex-husband to protect Paul. I had told Donald everything. The records of dealings with the authorities during the divorce. The medical reports and photos of injuries. Photos of the destroyed home were all shown. Even when Mary was injured by her husband's violence, she protected Paul at all costs. She divorced to avoid any harm coming to Paul. That was when Paul was 1 year old. The ex-husband ran off without paying any compensation or child support. Naturally, there was never any contact from him wanting to see Paul. That was what Mary couldn't forgive the most. She worked hard and saved this money for Paul. Even after marrying me, she continued saving in that bank account from the money she was free to use. Despite there being hardly any leeway, I thought of this bank account as a self-satisfaction, fulfilling my selfish parental pride by doing something for Paul. After marrying Donald, we were financially more comfortable. We didn't have to worry about daily expenses. We could buy necessary school supplies when needed. We were able to get insurance. We could pay the tuition fees without delay. All thanks to Donald. But since Paul is my child, I wanted to do something for him. I may not be blood related to Paul, but I love him as my son. I truly believe that. I think Donald and Paul are like real father and son. But in a different dimension, Mary loves Paul. It's incomparable to me. I think it's meaningless even to compare. It's embarrassing to have it put into words again, but I think it's true. Paul is more precious to me than my own life. I've felt that way since he was conceived. Then what did you say just now? Say it again. I'm sorry. When Donald raised his voice to question, Paul apologized just as loudly. Really, I'm sorry. That's right, I vaguely remember. The old apartment we used to live in when I was little, and moving out from there. Do you remember? You only lived there until you were 3. It was when Donald and I moved to a spacious condominium when we got married. Sorry, thank you. Mom and Dad, thank you. Paul, looking us straight in the eye, had the same kind face of the gentle son he's always been. Really, I'm sorry. I'll think it over again. We'll plan a ceremony that we can actually afford, just the 2 of us. What? Wait a minute. The one who cut in was Jessica. It was the first time she spoke up in front of us. I'm not changing the plan, okay? I actually want to add more options. There are so many more things I want to do. Jessica, shouting at Paul, was nothing like the demure image she had presented. Selfish, hysterical, and self-centered. We live this modestly, so you must have saved more money, right? It's your son's wedding, so pay up. Jessica then directed her hostility towards me as well. I wasn't surprised by Jessica's words, but what an outrageous woman she was. I sighed before deciding to speak up. Paul just said it, didn't he? We should consider within the budget of both your savings and what I can contribute. Are you kidding? If it's going to be such a poor-looking party, better not have it at all. Then maybe it's best not to have it? No, if there's no party, then there's no point in getting married. It was utterly illogical. Where should I even start to make them listen? How much is the party costing now? $80,000. $80,000? How much can you 2 contribute? Suddenly, Jessica fell silent. She shifted her gaze to Paul. I can only manage $10,000. Jessica says it's impossible for her. If Jessica's family is wealthy, couldn't you ask them for support? Jessica's parents said they wouldn't give any money. Jessica was told you'd understand why. Wasn't hers supposedly a rich family? Yet, why wouldn't they pay for their daughter's party? Donald and I exchanged puzzled looks. When we all stared at Jessica, waiting for her to explain, she made a face as if she'd tasted something bitter. Jessica. It's impossible. But why? I overspent a bit. On what? Dad's credit card. Jessica gradually answered Paul's questions. It turned out Jessica was given a credit card by her father as pocket money, which she used for shopping. However, Her spending spiraled out of control, maxing out the credit card limit, and her parents were furious. Realizing they had spoiled her too much, they decided not to give her any more money, no matter the situation, to make her experience earning her own money. She was placed in the same company as Paul through a family connection. Yet, it seems Jessica hadn't saved anything at all. Living at home, she shouldn't have had living expenses, but the habit of spending money as if it were infinite was hard to break. That's why Jessica's parents decided not to contribute financially to the party. They probably believe it won't be until Jessica adopts a normal sense of money that this stance will change, but for now, it's deemed impossible. Then $80,000 is impossible. That's why you should ask your real family to pay. Paul whispered his feelings meekly, but Jessica pressed him loudly.
Didn't I say? If we don't share the same view on money, we can't get married. There's no point in marrying someone who doesn't have money. I have no use for poor people.
Jessica is the poorest here.
What did you say?
Jessica was infuriated by Paul's blunt words. Probably the last thing she wanted to hear.
After calling my family poor, to think you're the poorest is just ridiculous. Anyway, let's apologize properly. Of course, I need to apologize too. If you don't have money, there's no use for you. We're getting a divorce anyway.
Jessica's attitude seemed nothing more than a string of whims, and Paul's response became sluggish. It must be exhausting when the conversation goes nowhere. Why did Jessica marry Paul? So, I decided to ask what I wanted to know. She seemed capable of answering. I wanted to marry someone from the same company. Why someone from the same company? If you marry someone from the same company, you can quit your job, right? I see. That used to be quite common. When colleagues from the same workplace got married, it was often the woman who quit. Maybe that culture still exists at Paul and Jessica's company. I don't want to work anymore. If I get married, I can quit, right? I can't quit right now because of the wedding guests, but I'm quitting as soon as the party's over. It felt wrong on many levels, but at least it was clear that Jessica's parents' intentions weren't getting through at all. What a pity. Why did you always whisper to Paul and let him do the talking? I was simply curious. I couldn't understand why she would do such a thing.
It's because I didn't want to talk to someone who reeks of poverty. I didn't want to be tainted by it. Plus, they'd listen if it's their son talking, right?
I was amazed that there were actually people who would say something like this, a clear mistake. At this point, there's really no saving her.
Jessica, can you explain this?
I took an envelope from the cabinet behind me and spread its contents on the table for Jessica to see. It was several photos. In all of them, Jessica was pictured, but she was arm in arm or embracing men who were not Paul. And each photo featured a different man.
Jessica, what is this about? It's what I want to know. What is this?
Jessica panicked at Paul's question. But I wasn't about to let it slide.
These are evidence of your affairs, aren't they? What? Are you serious? Did you hire a detective?
Correct. When I heard Jessica threatening divorce if my son's ties with our family weren't cut, I wondered why she would so easily resort to divorce. The discrepancy between her public facade and her true nature seemed too large, raising my suspicion. So, I had a detective investigate, including any affairs. The results were striking. Or perhaps more aptly, they were a complete miss. It appeared she had been dating several men, hiding the fact that she was married.
Are you dating these men to get them to buy you things? Of course. If I can't buy them myself, someone else has to.
Is there a need to go to hotels?
Shut up! Shut up! It's none of your business.
Jessica seemed resigned, not bothering to hide her actions anymore. This concerns me, though. Paul spoke in a low voice. Jessica flinched but soon glared at Paul with sharp eyes.
We're getting a divorce.
Of course. And I'll be seeking compensation.
Why?
You should know why. Paul glared back at Jessica. Her assertive stance seemed to leave her speechless, and she stood up abruptly.
I'm leaving. I've had enough.
With those words, she stomped off and left. The sound of the door closing echoed, and we all sighed deeply together. Paul and Jessica's divorce was finalized without issue. Though we sought compensation, the likelihood of receiving full payment was slim. Worse, Jessica had accumulated debt from purchasing expensive bags and shoes that she had insisted Paul buy for her, with Paul co-signing the loans. Given Jessica's likely bankruptcy, all debt repayment responsibilities would fall on Paul, potentially demanded in full due to his guarantor status. After consulting with a lawyer, it seemed manageable through debt restructuring, so that was the planned course of action. Although they divorced, the obligation to repay the debts didn't disappear, and having to pay a large amount of debt for a woman he no longer loved is a sad tale. However, it can only be considered an expensive lesson learned. All I did was have a lawyer send letters to Jessica's affair partners. The letters insinuated that they might be liable for the debts Jessica incurred during the marriage, questioning if they were okay with that given their involvement in her adultery. This led to all of Jessica's affair partners, now aware of her misdeeds, coming to the company demanding repayment for the money they had spent on her. Then, all meeting face to face, they started another commotion, which eventually made the company aware of the situation. Jessica, who was disowned by her own family, seems to be living alone in a cheap and old apartment.
Home sweet home.
Welcome back. Dinner's ready soon.
Yay! I'm going to wash my hands.
After the divorce, Paul started visiting home occasionally, just like before, spending time with the family. Actually, I was pretty angry about the whole situation and was thinking of banning Paul from coming over for a while, but after he came to our house alone later. I'm truly sorry. He apologized sincerely. I thought to myself that an apology doesn't fix everything, still feeling angry.
It's okay. Mary and I both love you, Paul.
Donald said with a gentle smile, so I couldn't stay mad any longer, and things went back to normal. Have you finished paying off your debts? Yeah, managed with my savings. But now I've used them all up. That was brave of you. The thought of the interest rates sent shivers down my spine. Well, I guess I deserved it. While having dinner, we talked about such things, and Paul chuckled. Despite the tough times, seeing him accept and overcome his mistakes, able to talk about it like this, made me think my son has grown as a person.
Mom, can I have some more?
Of course. Living with just Donald and occasionally having Paul come back home, I felt happy that the three of us could spend time together just like before.
If you have a complaint, then you can leave. This is our home. I finally lost my temper at the person in front of me who was yelling at me. Sheesh, I really did it, didn't I? I thought so for a moment, but I had no regrets. My name is Susan, 33 years old. I live with my husband John and our 3-year-old daughter, Lily. I started working part-time at a local supermarket after Lily started kindergarten. Although my days are nothing special, I've come to appreciate my ordinary life. But for the past 6 months, I've been bothered by something.
Hey Susan, this is a stylish outfit.
You should have been careful in washing it. The person showing me the slightly wrinkled clothes complained. She's John's sister, and my sister-in-law. Her name is Patricia. She's unmarried, and as far as I remember, she's 40 years old. Huh? I didn't know. It was just mixed in with the usual laundry, so I didn't notice.
I would think you would know it's an expensive one just by looking at it. But I suppose you wouldn't understand, being fond of non-brands, Susan.
When she said that, she went back to her room with a face like it can't be helped. Well, you should wash it yourself then, I said under my breath. It was always like this. Patricia seemed to take it for granted that I would take care of things for her. Even after I had done her laundry, she treated me like this. It was so frustrating, and for some reason, I was even preparing my sister-in-law's lunch.
You're making Lily's lunch, right? Then could you make mine too?
I tried to refuse, suggesting she should make her own, but she responded,
I've never made lunch before. My mom always did it for me.
I don't care. I'm not your mother. Then, this stupid sister-in-law took my daughter's lunchbox to the office without permission, which I made early in the morning. I lost it. Couldn't you tell it was Lily's? Just by looking at it? Lily was crying this morning because her favorite lunchbox was missing. Despite how angry I was, she just responded,
I thought you'd made it for me since it was on the table. I'm sorry.
With a silly grin on her face. What's with that face? It's not cute at all, I thought to myself. By the way, her review of the lunch was,
I'm on a diet, so it was just the right amount.
She could at least say thank you. I suggested she could just buy lunch, but she replied she didn't want to because it would be unbalanced nutritionally. As a sort of revenge, I made her lunches filled with frozen meals a few times, but it didn't seem to bother her. Basically, it was clear she just wanted to make her own life easier. Enough! Half a year ago, we began living in this house with my in-laws. Since we moved here, I've found myself getting irritated much more frequently. Even if I told John about it, he didn't seem to take it seriously, while I was begrudgingly doing the housework.
Susan, I'm sorry.
My mother-in-law, leaning on her cane, started a conversation. She had lost her husband about a decade ago and had continued to work as a full-time employee since then. She had slightly high blood pressure, which led to her suffering a stroke one day. Fortunately, she survived, but was left with a slight paralysis on her right side. With the help of a cane and leg brace, she could still manage to walk. However, maintaining her job was too much of a challenge, so she had to quit her long-term employment. Now she lives on her pension.
It's a real lifesaver that you've come. Thank you, Patricia. As always, I apologize, she said.
My mother-in-law had no language impairment and could converse like this. Whenever my sister-in-law and I had a disagreement, she would always apologize to me like this. To my selfish sister-in-law, my mother-in-law would regularly say,
Enough is enough. You should leave right now.
But my sister-in-law would just respond with,
Huh? Why? It's convenient to live here since it's close to work. Okay, I'll consider it.
Showing that she wasn't really taking it seriously. My mother-in-law was never an old-fashioned bully, and she would always thank me. Even my daughter Lily was very attached to my mother-in-law. When I first heard that my mother-in-law had collapsed, I could never have imagined that things would turn out this way. Because my sister was also living with her, and even though my sister-in-law had a job, my mother-in-law was neither bedridden nor needed 24-hour nursing care. I just thought I'd drop by once in a while and lend a helping hand if needed. But my husband thought differently. Let's move into my parents' house. My husband told me this after my mother-in-law's collapse, and after a day at work. What? Caught by surprise, I stared at him open-mouthed, and he said, I've already contacted the real estate agent and will terminate the lease at the end of next month. You can't just spring this on me and moving in together all of a sudden? Wouldn't your mother dislike that? I was shocked and told him so. Despite what I said, my husband said, "It'll be fine, and it's my childhood home after all. I'll be comfortable there, and I know my mom would be happy living with her son and granddaughter." How easygoing could he be? Well, it might be fine for you, John, since it's your childhood home. Lily, you'd like to live with Grandma, right? Asked this by my husband. Our innocent daughter answered,
Yes, Lily loves Grandma.
At that time, I didn't think my sister-in-law would be so terrible, and I seriously thought it would be tough to leave my mother-in-law to Patricia. Patricia must have a tough time handling it all alone. Let's all pitch in and help until things settle down, I told my husband. In response to my words, my husband replied, Huh? Help out? Well, yeah, sure. His response was vague, and I wasn't sure if he understood or not. And that's how things went. And before we knew it, we had moved into my husband's family home. As I expected, my mother-in-law had a complicated expression on her face on the first day we moved in.
I'm really fine, you know. Susan, suddenly moving in? You must have disliked it, right?
She told me with an indescribable expression on her face. Upon hearing those words, I immediately knew that my husband had made the decision to move in with his mother against her will. But there is such a thing as getting used to circumstances. And despite our initially stiff interactions, my mother-in-law and I gradually became amiable through continued conversations. She willingly helped with dinner and the household chores, saying it was sort of like therapy. My parents' house is far away from the center, and I was deeply moved. My mother and I used to cook together like this. It's kind of nostalgic.
Lily will help too.
Ever since she started attending kindergarten, my daughter Lily's vocabulary has grown. She plays with a lot of her friends, and her appetite has significantly increased. She's become more assertive recently, and when her favorite clothes are in the wash or she dislikes her hairstyle, she often has a sulky expression. Even that behavior is cute, and I can tell she's becoming more independent.
I'm taking a day off from kindergarten today.
Even when she puts on a sulky face.
Oh, Lily, you're looking super cute today, just like a princess.
When told this by her grandmother, she'd often perk up and cheerfully go to kindergarten. My self-centered husband and sister-in-law Patricia continued to be a source of concern, but I began to think that life at my in-laws might not be so bad. I never imagined what would happen next. Hey, since we started living in my childhood home, you should increase my allowance. One day, my husband actually said this. I didn't quite understand what he meant. Huh? What do you mean? It's hard to understand. As I said this, my husband looked puzzled and said, Well, we're living here now, so we're not paying rent or utility bills, right? So you can give that to me as my allowance. He said something stupid like that. Moreover, my husband said it was strange that his allowance remained unchanged, even though our household income should have increased since I started working part-time. We've come back to my original home, and everything is free. He even said that. What? Free? What's he talking about? Thinking to myself. Was it me, or was my husband crazy? I really couldn't understand what he was saying. If I had to say, I was confident it was my husband who was being ridiculous. Well, it's true that this is your mother's house, but we're living here and we often pay for groceries and daily necessities. The house we lived in was owned by my mother-in-law and had already been paid off by my late father-in-law. It was now her property. I believed that the utilities in the home maintenance fund, property tax, and fire insurance were paid by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law Patricia. Since I do most of the shopping, groceries and daily necessities are calculated from our household budget. For this, my mother-in-law would say apologetically after shopping,
"How much was it? Let me pay it this time."
but I refused. Sure, our expenses may have decreased a bit compared to when we were renting, but the addition of 2 more people meant that food expenses certainly increased, and when we could spare it, we were gracefully saving up for our daughter Lily's future. Furthermore, I was making lunch for my husband every day, and he rarely ate outside. My husband, who didn't have many friends, spent his holidays at home, mostly playing video games. Did he really need an allowance? I thought, but I gave him a reasonable amount anyway. I couldn't understand what he was so dissatisfied with. But when my husband John realized that our household was covering the living expenses, he muttered, "Why, that's silly," as he walked to his mother's room. What the hell is his problem? The one who's weird is him, not me. As I was thinking this and preparing for our daughter's kindergarten the next day, I began to hear a commotion coming from my mother-in-law's room. I peeked into the room, only to find John furiously questioning, "Why? Why do we have to contribute to living expenses? This is Mom's house, isn't it?" What is he even talking about? That's what I thought. As I glanced at my mother-in-law, she wasn't reprimanding him. Instead, she was just blankly staring at him, as if it was someone else's problem. Her eyes looked like those of a person who had given up on everything. Noticing my presence, John came over to me and said, "We don't have to pay anymore." He left, seemingly relieved, with a smug expression on his face. Watching his triumphant retreating figure, I cursed myself for my poor judgment in marrying such an idiot. However, if things continue this way, I might end up being labeled as a bad wife who doesn't want to contribute to the living expenses, protesting to my mother-in-law, and relying on John. I was getting anxious about this when my mother-in-law chuckled and said,
"Susan, shall we have some tea?"
She called out to me like that. That's when I heard a certain story from my mother-in-law. I was about to learn a shocking truth and a certain plan of hers. A few days later, my mother-in-law and I were preparing dinner with my daughter Lily, just like we usually do. That day, we were making Lily's favorite dish, dumplings. Lily was also helping out, making dumplings in her own unique shape.
"This is fun."
"It's good fine motor skills exercise." With that, my mother-in-law also joined in to help. Lily quickly got bored and started playing with toys in the next room. At that moment, my mother-in-law's smartphone, which was lying on the table, rang. The name displayed was John's.
"Oh, I wonder if he forgot something."
That's what my mother-in-law said. "He probably just forgot what to buy or something." Since our hands were sticky from the dumpling filling, she skillfully used the back of her hand to pull the call on speaker. "Hello, Mom? Hey, come on, answer the phone properly." What a rude guy. This is awkward. I glanced at my mother-in-law, who was silently staring at her phone.
"Help out with the shopping once in a while."
My mother-in-law forced my husband and sister-in-law to go shopping because it was a holiday. Just as I was about to respond to John on the phone,
"John, did Mom answer the phone?"
I heard my sister-in-law's voice. "No, I couldn't hear anything. Do you think Lily messed with it?" Hearing John say that, my sister-in-law began to say something alarming.
"But still."
My mother-in-law and I turned pale as we listened to what came next. Our hands were all sticky, but we quickly pressed the record button. The call ended after a while. After washing my hands, I made a call to a certain place.
"We're back."
After a while, John and my sister-in-law, who had no idea, returned home. "I'm back. Wait, What are you two up to?" No wonder my husband John and my sister-in-law looked so surprised. That's because me and my mother-in-law, with a troubled face, were sitting at the table in the living room, glaring at the two of them.
"Huh? What's with you two? You're scaring me."
My sister-in-law said something like that.
"Sit down. We have something to discuss with you two,"
my mother-in-law said, then signaled to me. I nodded suddenly, and then played the recording of their conversation that I had taken earlier.
"Still, I guess we can't get Mom's money unless she's gone, right?"
My sister-in-law spoke to my husband John in a casual tone, like she was deciding what to have for dinner. "Is that so? That's a bummer. You said you found $50,000. That's why I came here. The worst part is Mom is really sneaky. That's definitely Dad's inheritance. We only got a merely $1,000. Their conversation went on. Finally, my sister-in-law said,
"She's so slow, it's frustrating, isn't it? Like when she's slowly going down the stairs? Don't you sometimes want to push her?"
My sister-in-law said something awful, and my foolish husband John agreed. I totally get it. The call ended abruptly there. The two of them looked visibly uncomfortable, clearly never having imagined we were listening in. Hearing their conversation, I felt a threat to my mother-in-law's safety and immediately consulted the police. However, they didn't seem very helpful, saying it was a family matter. After the call, my mother-in-law said, "I understand how you two feel very well. I've been thinking about it for a while now. I'm selling this house and moving." The two of them were surprised to hear this, eyes wide open. Only my stupid husband and sister-in-law have such stupid faces. In fact, I have been consulting with my mother-in-law about this for a while now. The biggest issue was my sister-in-law. Until I heard about this from my mother-in-law, I had assumed my sister-in-law was contributing a fair share towards living expenses. But it turns out, ever since my sister-in-law started working, she hadn't given a single penny to the household. Perhaps she was still stuck in a student mindset, thinking house chores were the mother's job, and constantly complaining.
"It's my hard-earned money. I can spend it on whatever I want, right?"
She said this and continued to splurge on beauty treatments, vacations, and luxury goods. "If you've got so much money, either move out or contribute some to the household." When my father-in-law was alive, my sister-in-law would get scolded like this. Only at that time, it seems that there was a little pretend to help with housework, but after a while it was just back to normal. She never put any money into the house, and since my father-in-law passed away, my sister-in-law had been taking complete advantage of my mother-in-law and doing whatever she pleased.
"But Dad said I should save up instead of paying living expenses. And just because I've started working, it's weird to suddenly ask me to contribute to the household."
I knew she was trouble. Nothing's weird about that. My sister-in-law protested.
"I am not the bad one."
"Well, I wanted you to save money and move out. After I finished raising my kids, I wanted to have a quiet life. How many years has it been since you started working? You don't contribute a cent to the household. You must be quite the wealthy lady by now." My sister-in-law looked frustrated, seemingly lost for words.
"I have a job. Moving out all of a sudden is troublesome."
To add insult to injury, my sister-in-law, lost in her delusions, began to say such things. "Why would I take you with me? How silly. You've lived however you've pleased until now. Feel free to continue doing so." Finally understanding my mother-in-law's seriousness, both started to panic.
"What about the $50,000? Wasn't that our father's money, Mom? Have you been hiding inheritance shares? I might tell the police."
Such were the words of my foolish sister-in-law. When my mother-in-law fell ill, she must have found the bank book by herself. My husband and I got in touch about our mother-in-law, and the conversation somehow shifted to the $50,000. They probably thought they'd get a share too, which is why my husband hastily moved back in. Their stupidity gave me a headache. With a victorious expression, my mother-in-law calmly said, "That was my money from when I was single. Your father had nothing to do with it. You two have been making a fuss about inheritance, but you foolish kids never let me save any money." My mother-in-law told me that my father-in-law's favorite phrase was, "How long do I have to keep working?" Before marrying me, my husband John lived the same way as my sister-in-law, which shocked me to the core. I remember when we were looking for an apartment, he would ask dumb questions like, "What's a security deposit? A key fee? Homeowner's insurance? Aren't utility bills supposed to be around $30 a month?" I cursed my past self. Our conversation must have woken up Lily, who had been sleeping in the next room. With a sleepy face,
"If you do something wrong, you should say sorry, right? Can Papa and my auntie do that? Since you are grown-ups?"
Lily looked at John and my sister-in-law and said, This made me laugh, which seemed to upset my sister-in-law, who then said,
"What's so funny? You must have said something to Mom."
In response to her, my mother-in-law intervened. "Stop it! Stop it!" However, I calmly replied. I laughed because I found it funny. I thought my daughter Lily was acting more mature than you. I calmly said, "I do the laundry, make lunch, but with no appreciation from you two. Lily can say thank you, right? Why can't you utter a single word, sister-in-law? Are you a baby?" I may have overstepped a bit, but my usual irritation exploded into words. "Aren't you embarrassed to make me wash your tacky underwear? Where did your sense of shame go? It'd be better for you to move out and find it." As I spoke indifferently, my red-faced sister-in-law said,
"If you have any complaints, get out. This is our house. Take that annoying kid and get out."
At this point, I had had enough. "Shut up! You should leave. You? Such an idiot!" I shouted with a voice so loud that my throat hurt, but I didn't regret it one bit. A while ago, after dinner, I was watching TV when a segment came up. "Adult men and women living in their childhood rooms are increasing." Apparently, that's what they call people who, although technically employed, use all their salary solely for their own pleasure, continue to live at home with their parents, and leave all household chores to them like some selfish demons. The scariest thing I felt when watching this TV show was not the program itself, but the sight of my husband John and my sister-in-law Patricia laughing uproariously at the feature, asking,
"Are there really such people out there?"
Whether my sister-in-law was silenced by my spirited gaze or what I said. A few days later, the day came when my mother-in-law decided to leave the house. "Well then, I'm putting this place up for sale, so I'd like you two to move out by the end of the month." Saying this, she left without revealing her destination. "Who would have thought it would come to this? We have to find a house for the four of us to live in. It would be nice if we could find a nice single-family home." Upon hearing my husband's absurd words, "If it's just the two of you, wouldn't a two-bedroom be enough?" I retorted. And to my words, John laughed, asking, "Two people? How do you figure that?" He and my sister-in-law laughed off the situation, but ignoring them, I said, "All right then, let's go, Lily. Shall we go to see my mom?" At my words, my daughter Lily also responded,
"Yes, I'm happy because it's been a while since I've seen Grandpa and Grandma."
She had a smile on her face. What do you mean?" He is flustered, as if he doesn't know what's going on. His confusion was comical, prompting me to say, "I'm divorcing you. The thought that Lily and I could be pushed down the stairs one day scares me. I can't live with you anymore." In response to my words, he stammered, That was just a joke, right, sis?" My sister-in-law, possibly worried about losing her potential maid, responded, Yes, so let's live happily together. John even had the audacity to suggest living together in my parents' home, to which I responded, how can a person who can't even care for his own parents possibly care for others? That's what I told him. Right then, the taxi we had called arrived. As Lily and I got in, I said, please feel free to live your life as you wish. I left my in-laws home with a smile. In the background, I could hear John crying out, don't go! Don't go! Like a child. In the past, I thought that childishness was cute. However, now I can only think of it as, wow, I feel bad. As for John and my sister-in-law, they ended up renting a small apartment with no security deposit or key money, as they had little savings combined. With little life skills and a reluctance to lower their lifestyle, they inevitably struggled to get by. They should struggle. It's too late for regrets. By the way, the reason that my sister-in-law noisily fixed a lunchbox was because she was trying to impress a colleague at work. She didn't know, but the coworker already had a lovely girlfriend. Her lunches, which she obviously didn't make herself, became a topic of office gossip when they abruptly changed from nice meals to something awful in the lunchbox. I heard they caused quite the stir in the office. Apparently, she was the butt of many jokes behind her back. This was a story I heard from a mom friend who happened to work at the same place as my sister-in-law. I couldn't help but laugh. But she's a stranger to me now, so I could care less. Having returned to my parents' home, I now live peacefully with the help of my parents and my daughter Lily. My ex-husband John spent all his free time gaming and hardly ever played with Lily. So far, she hasn't seemed lonely or shed any tears. She has made new friends at her new preschool and seems happy attending there with a smile on her face. When Lily gets a bit older, if she wants to see her father, I'll let her, as that's her right. I wanted to take care of my family and spend each day without any regrets.
I'm Miss Zoe Reyes, 21 years old. I call myself a writer, for now. I have an older brother. His name is Mr. Axel Reyes, 30 years old. He works at a big company after graduating from college. Our parents passed away in a car accident when I was in 9th grade. I fell into depression from the shock and became a hermit. As a result, I couldn't go to high school. Afterward, I went to a doctor and recovered, thanks to my brother's help. When our parents died, my brother had just started working after graduating from college. He faced a tough situation right away, but took care of me, even helping with the housework. I decided to start doing what I could, little by little, like cleaning my room, the house, and then laundry and cooking, regaining my daily life with my brother's help. Now, we live together in the house our parents left behind. We split housework, but since I mainly work from home, I'm in charge of preparing meals and shopping. Going out for groceries is a nice change of pace. I also find cooking enjoyable, coming up with menus and following recipes. So, I'm good at cooking. When I was a hermit, my brother bought me a laptop. "Take a look at the unknown world with this," he said, and I explored various worlds on the internet. I started wanting to visit places I found in photos and videos on video sharing sites and forums, and my brother took me there, or I went alone. Without my brother's support, I might still be a hermit. Eventually, I learned about remote work. Gradually, I began working and had more chances to go out, returning to a normal life. After our parents passed away, my brother became like a parent to me. He's both kind and strict, a person with a good balance. He studied hard, which is why he was able to get a job at a big company after attending a national university. 7 years have passed since he joined the company, and now he is a team leader. There was a change in my brother. He had always been shy around women, But as his friends got married one after another, he finally started dating someone he met through a friend's introduction. 2 years later, she proposed and they decided to get married. One day, he invited me to meet someone over dinner. It was a Japanese-style restaurant. My brother shyly introduced the woman who would become my sister-in-law. Her name is Miss Nora Reyes. She graduated from the same university as my brother and is 2 years younger. She works as an office lady at a major food company. Her wavy, semi-long hair makes her look older than her age. Nice to meet you. I'm Zoe, the sister. Please take care of my brother. Likewise. I'm Miss Nora Reyes. You're such a cute sister. I always wanted a sister, so I'm really happy you'll become one, she said with a smile. She wore slightly heavy makeup, but she seemed like a lovely woman. Then, she asked about me. Since Axel went to a good university, I assume you graduated from a decent one too, Zoe? My brother answered for me. Well, actually, Zoe didn't go to college. When our parents died in an accident, she was in 9th grade. She struggled with her mental health. It took her some time to recover. Of course, she can live a normal life now. What? She was sick in 9th grade? So she couldn't attend high school either? Nora seemed very surprised and pressed further. I added to my brother's explanations, since it was about me. Yes, that's right. I caused trouble for my brother because of my illness. But thanks to him, I was able to recover. No amount of gratitude is enough for what he did. I see. I understand now. Nora, my brother may look a bit older because of his struggles, but he has a great personality. Please look beyond appearances. What are you talking about? I tried to lighten the mood with a joke since the conversation became serious. But Nora didn't laugh. At the time, I thought Nora was moved by what my brother had done for me. From what I heard, Nora's parents both graduated from prestigious universities, and their entire family had attended college. Naturally, they had excellent grades and worked at well-known companies, with many in professional roles like doctors and lawyers. They were an impressive family. Nora's father was an executive at a major publishing company, and her mother was the president of a local women's association. Hearing that, I thought my brother was going to join a great family. Busy with work, my brother steadily prepared for the wedding. Seeing him happy made me happy too, and I helped out with various tasks. One day, I received a call on my smartphone. I was a little nervous about answering a call from an unknown person, but the number was displayed, so I answered. Who is this? Zoe, I'm Nora's mother. Nice to meet you. To my surprise, the caller was Nora's mother, who would become my mother-in-law. What can I do for you? Feeling anxious, I asked, and she replied, I heard from Nora the other day that you didn't attend high school and only graduated from middle school? I didn't know what she wanted to say, but I answered honestly. Yes, when my parents died in an accident, I suffered from mental health issues, and it took me a long time to fully recover. That's why I couldn't go to high school. I sympathize with your situation, but the fact remains that you only have a middle school education, right? Yes, I see. I have a favor to ask. Could you please not attend Axel and Nora's wedding ceremony? Actually, don't attend! What do you mean? I was taken aback by the sudden, outrageous request. Axel and Nora both graduated from top universities, and my husband and I also graduated from college. Of course, all our relatives have college degrees. Yes? What about it? You're not very smart, are you? No wonder you only finished middle school. With a sigh, my mother-in-law continued the conversation. You see, as I mentioned earlier, our family is made up of elites. Graduating from college is a given, and we hold prestigious jobs like executives at big corporations, doctors, lawyers. These are the kind of impressive people attending the wedding. I began to understand what she was getting at. So, we don't want you, a middle school graduate, at such an event. Actually, we'd rather you not come. But I'm the sister of the groom and his only family. I can't just not attend. Please don't come anyway. How could we introduce you, a middle school graduate, to our relatives without feeling embarrassed? Do you understand? Anyway, I've told you our wishes. How rude. After hanging up, I trembled with anger. The parents on the other side disliked me because of my middle school education, as they were too concerned with appearances and reputation. At least, I never thought of my life as embarrassing, and I believed that I didn't deserve to be looked down upon by others. But what if my presence made my brother unhappy? If I stepped back, my brother could have a happy marriage and a future beyond that. I've caused him a lot of trouble, so I want him to be happy, no matter what. I can't be the one to ruin that. But I also couldn't stand being dismissed. My thoughts were all jumbled up. I talked to my brother about the situation. He said, "Don't worry. You're my sister, my only family. Feel free to attend my wedding. I'll protect you, no matter what." But if I cause trouble for you, I don't mind not attending. There's no way you'll cause trouble. Zoe, you're my one and only sister. If I can't protect my sister, what kind of brother would I be? Thank you, brother. Encouraged by his words, I decided to attend the wedding. And on the day of the wedding, at the family introduction, when my uncle introduced me as our family representative, my sister-in-law's parents looked at me with disdain. My brother seemed to notice their attitude. At the reception, the seats for the bride and groom's families were at the back, facing the main table. I wondered if there might not be a seat prepared for me, but there was. As I sat down, I felt piercing stares. Sure enough, my mother-in-law was looking at me. She marched over to me and said, "Why are you here? I told you not to come because you'd be a disgrace to our family, didn't I?" "I am his real sister. There's no reason for me not to attend," I strongly replied, and she snapped back. "For a middle school graduate, you sure are insolent. Just remember this." Leaving those harsh words behind, my mother-in-law walked away. Soon, the bride and groom entered the room. Seeing my brother in a different atmosphere than usual, I couldn't help but smile. Nora was beautifully dressed and sparkling. As soon as the mediator finished speaking, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and talked to the MC. Then, she grabbed the microphone and started speaking loudly. "Our family has all graduated from college and hold respectable jobs. I believe that Axel is a suitable person for our family. But there is one issue." She took a breath and continued. "It is his middle school graduate sister. She is an incredibly embarrassing presence in our family. We would like to ask the groom to sever ties with her. If he can't, we cannot allow this marriage." There was a commotion in the room, but my mother-in-law ignored it and turned to my brother. "Axel, can you swear to do that here? Swear to cut ties with this embarrassing middle school graduate sister and become a part of our excellent family." As if it were obvious, both the bride and father-in-law nodded. Then, with a triumphant look, she handed the microphone to my brother. Taking the microphone, my brother took a deep breath and answered, "Indeed, my sister is a middle school graduate, but she is my only blood relative, my family, since our parents have passed away. I can't sever ties with her. I apologize to all of you who have attended today, but I will cancel the marriage and consider this relationship with this family as non-existent. This is my answer. With that, my brother slammed the microphone down on the table and came straight to me. With a refreshed smile, he spoke to me. Zoe, I'm sorry for causing trouble. There's no need for us to be here. Let's go home. Later, I heard from the relatives who attended that the reception was canceled because the groom left halfway through. The bride burst in tears, and her parents were scolded by the relatives and had to apologize on their hands and knees. They were also forced to return the gift money. Later, my uncle contacted my brother. He said that although his attitude at the reception wasn't praiseworthy, he would have severed ties with him if it had continued. He also offered to pay a suitable amount of consolation money and have the bride's side bear all the expenses for the ceremony, but my brother refused. He conveyed that he wanted a sincere apology for his sister rather than a monetary solution. After a while, a meeting was arranged at our home for post-settlement discussions. I made up my mind to show my former in-laws a thing or two. At the meeting, my ex-sister-in-law and her parents, a total of 3 people, came. They handed my brother some money as a gift, an inconvenience fee, and apologized for the rudeness at the reception. But it didn't feel like a sincere apology. There was a sense of reluctance. As for my ex-mother-in-law, she said things like, "We should have investigated more thoroughly. If we had, this wouldn't have happened," showing no sign of remorse. My ex-father-in-law also continued, "Axel should have told us about his sister in detail from the beginning. Then we wouldn't have ended up unhappy." Anger welled up inside me, and I carried out my prepared plan. "Ex-father-in-law, well, you're not really my stepfather anymore, but for convenience, I'll call you that. You work at Rainbow Publishing, right?" He glanced at me and said, "Yeah, I do. I'm a director there. What about it?" He looked down on me. "I work with Rainbow Publishing, but I can't bring myself to like a company where you are. I want to terminate the contract." "Is that all? I don't care. There are plenty of workers. It won't have any impact." "Understood. I'll quit immediately. And I'll sign a contract with your rival company." "Go ahead. Do as you please." With my ex-father-in-law's arrogance and my peripheral vision, I called the editor at Rainbow Publishing and informed them about the contract termination. There was a commotion on the other end of the phone, but I only conveyed what I wanted to say and hung up. Then, I called the rival company and told them I wanted to proceed with the contract. Even after my call, my ex-father-in-law remained smug. My brother, unable to grasp the situation, looked around nervously. Eventually, a call came to my ex-father-in-law's smartphone. "Hello? It's me. Yeah." "What? The president? What's going on?" Then, he suddenly whispered, and his face turned pale. After finishing the call, my ex-father-in-law turned to me and said, Are you the popular author? Yes, Ray?" "Well, yeah. Yes, Ray is my pen name for light novels. So what?" "So, you mean our president said a popular author is breaking the contract with us, and it's my fault?" "I just asked you if it was okay to terminate the contract, and you said it didn't matter. That's all there is to it," I said it calmly. "You're an elite, right? Isn't it embarrassing for you to deal with a middle school dropout like me?" "I'm sorry. I apologize. But can you reconsider terminating the contract?" Seeing my father-in-law's sudden change in attitude, my ex-sister-in-law asked curiously, "Why would you be so humble to a mere middle school dropout girl?" "Idiots! You're our publishing house's top author. If you leave, the damage to our company would be enormous. The president told me to take responsibility. At this rate, I'll be demoted. What? Really? Yeah. If that happens, it'll be too embarrassing to associate with her relatives. Please, do something. My ex-sister-in-law and her parents were confused and turning against each other. Please, can you reconsider? It's impossible. The matter is settled, so please leave. My brother also sided with me. Then, please leave as requested. My brother and I smiled as we saw the three of them leave our house, shoulders slumped. After the three left, my brother said, You're a popular author? I didn't know that either. Well, I used a pen name. When I posted a work I wrote last year online, it got good reviews. Rainbow Publishing offered me a contract. I've been making quite a bit of money, I explained proudly. My brother's smile brightened. It had been a long time since I'd seen him smile like that. And so, the broken engagement was resolved. My ex-sister-in-law seemed to be looking for another partner. But no one would approach her since the incident became widely known. She became reclusive and eventually quit her job. My ex-father-in-law, being blamed for my contract termination, was demoted to a regular employee. Unable to endure warehouse work, he resigned. My ex-mother-in-law was harshly criticized by her relatives for her disgraceful behavior at the wedding reception and was no longer recognized by her once proud and accomplished family. It serves them right. My new publisher supported me, and my popular work was turned into a comic. Its popularity rose again, and now there's a talk of an anime adaptation. My brother is burying the memory of the wedding as a dark history and working hard. I'm eagerly waiting for a wonderful person to impair my brother's life. At last, our days have returned to being peaceful. I'm still racking my brain over creating light novels, but I feel that the repetition of these days is happiness. I'm planning to go on a trip with my brother again, taking our late parents' house with us, who passed away in the accident.
May I have a moment of your time, please? It's about your mother. The doctor, pulling my arm, looked deeply troubled. My mother has been wheelchair-bound for 10 years, regularly visiting the hospital for checkups and rehabilitation. Today, like any other day, we came for her tests, and she's currently being examined. While waiting for her rehabilitation session, this doctor pulled me aside. I'll hear about my mother from her regular doctor? I gently shook off the doctor's hand from my right arm. The doctor in front of me is a woman, but my mother's regular doctor is a man. I haven't heard of any changes. Why is a doctor who isn't her regular talking to me about my mother? Looking skeptically, the female doctor in front of me clasped my hands with both of hers. It's a matter I can't discuss with your mother or her doctor. I need to tell you alone. Just me? I took a step towards the female doctor, who looked at me with a serious expression. I am Hannah, a 35-year-old single office worker. I work for a major corporation, but currently I'm working remotely for a certain reason. I've been raised by a single mother since before I can remember. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I don't even remember what my father looked like. All I know is that his name was Ryan. According to my mother, my father was a good-for-nothing. He treated her like a slave and left with a younger woman, saying he was bothered by having a child. I've never been able to contact him, and all his photos were discarded by my mother. After the divorce, my mother easily won custody, given the circumstances. She worked late nights, raising me as a single mother, for which I'm immensely grateful. Thanks to her, I could attend college and land a job at a major corporation. Having received so much love from her, I never felt lonely growing up with a single mother. I've never had the desire to meet my father. My mother always said, "That man was truly hopeless, so Hannah, you should think you never had a father." When I first heard about how he treated her, and his infidelity, I couldn't contain my anger towards him. So I never envied my friends whose parents attended school events together. As my mother advised, I hardly ever thought about my father and started living alone as soon as I got a job. I was busy, but lived a fulfilling life until a turning point came when I was 25. My mother was involved in a traffic accident, leading to a life bound to a wheelchair. Unable to walk, she had to quit her job, and the always cheerful mother began to lose her smile and became withdrawn. Her mental health deteriorated, and despite having many helpers, none seemed to be a good match, and she became severely emaciated. Worried by her repeated requests for me to return home, I decided to move back to take care of her. I planned to use my leave for about a week to focus on caregiving, thinking to return once she got better. She seemed reassured by my return, showing smiles after a few days. But when I mentioned returning to my job soon, she completely changed. "No, Hannah, please don't go back. Don't leave me alone." She cried hysterically, clinging to me. "Mom, calm down. I understand. I'll talk to my office again." Confused but unable to turn my back on the mother who raised me alone, I decided to stay. She had always been apprehensive about me living alone. Maybe living together again made her fear loneliness more. Her weakening legs and depressed state must be hard on her. I discussed with my company and decided to switch to remote work, working shorter hours until my mother's condition improved. But since then, my mom has been avoiding being alone at all costs. Even when I'm working remotely, she always wants to be right by my side, clinging to me. No matter how much I love her, there are things I can't show to anyone but my coworkers, so I had to ask her to leave the room. But she would always wait somewhere where she could see into my room. I felt like I was always being watched, and I hated myself for thinking that way. Mom kept going to the hospital for rehab, but her leg wasn't getting any better. This meant I had no prospect of returning to the main office. My personal life was all about caring for her, so I hadn't met anyone new and didn't have a boyfriend. This lifestyle was now going into its 10th year. Now my mom is 60, and it seems like her dependency on me is getting worse as she gets older. Whenever I leave the house for a bit, like to go shopping, she panics and insists on coming along. It takes so much time to calm her down. Living alone again just isn't an option. There was no way I could abandon my mother, who has loved and raised me since I was a child. Then, one day, today was her regular checkup, and I always accompany her to the hospital. Her doctor, Daniel, a man in his 40s, has been treating her for 10 years, and I trust him completely. After Mom went into the examination room, I stepped outside the hospital to handle some work calls. When I returned about 10 minutes later, a doctor stopped me. "Excuse me, you're Madison's daughter, right?" Madison is my mom's name. The doctor, who appeared to be around my age, was a woman named Amelia. She recently started working at the hospital and works in the same department as Daniel, my mom's doctor. Surprised, I replied, "Yes, that's me. Is there something wrong?" "Do you have a moment? I actually need to talk to you about your mother." "About my mom? Sure, I don't mind." I nodded, assuming the examination wasn't over yet. Amelia then led me to a small private room near the examination rooms, seemingly used for consultations. I took a seat as she suggested, and Amelia, sitting across a small table, looked straight at me and asked, "So you're back at your parents' house taking care of Madison, right?" Yeah, that's right." I told Amelia that I've been working from home while taking care of my mom for the past 10 years. Since I moved back home, I hardly had any chance to hang out with friends, and I never talked to anyone else about it. Amelia listened quietly, nodding, and I found myself venting about my daily frustrations. "I'm sorry for rambling on like this." "It's okay. So it's been 10 years? She smiled kindly at me, and then seemed to ponder something looking down. When she looked up, her expression was serious, and she started to speak. But what reached my ears wasn't Amelia's words. but my mother's scream. Rushing to the door, what I saw left me speechless. And Amelia, slowly shaking her head, said, "You need to leave your parents' house right now. You have to get away from your mother." Her words left me speechless, and I could only nod silently, holding back a surge of anger. Without going back to my mother, I returned home. As soon as I got back, I started packing my things in a hurry. The image of my mom at the hospital was still fresh in my mind. 2 hours later, I was still packing. My phone kept ringing with calls from Mom. She must be panicking because I hadn't shown up after her appointments. But I ignored the constant ringing and only answered in the evening when I had finished packing. "Hannah, where are you? I've called so many times. Why didn't you answer?" As soon as the call connected, my mom yelled at me. Normally, I would apologize immediately. "Where am I? I'm home." But this time I replied indifferently. "You left me and went home first? Why would you do that?" My mom was almost hysterical, screaming at me. Sighing, I said, "Mom, I can't live with you anymore, so I'm leaving the house." And with that, I firmly told her my decision. What are you thinking? If you were gone, I couldn't go on living. How do you expect me to get home from the hospital?" "Why don't you walk home? Your legs have been fine for a while now. You don't really need the wheelchair or the care, do you?" When I continued like this, my mother let out a short cry, sounding almost like a scream. I could picture her terribly upset. "I found out everything that you've been hiding, Mom." I told my mother about what Amelia had shared with me and what I had witnessed myself at the hospital. According to Amelia, recent tests showed no abnormalities in my mother's muscles, bones, or nerves. She came up with the idea that it might be a psychological issue. My mother had convinced herself she couldn't walk, and therefore she really couldn't. The power of belief is not to be underestimated, and they were considering focusing not just on physical therapy, but also on mental health care. That's why they called me, a family member, to discuss incorporating emotional support into her rehabilitation. But at that moment, a woman's scream came from the direction of the examination room. "Ah!" Was that Mom's voice? Amelia and I exchanged glances, then hurried to check the examination room. There was a window through which we could see inside the room, and my mother was there, waving her hands as if to shoo away insects. Indeed, the scream was hers. But why would there be bugs in the examination room? It turned out she had mistaken some dust for something else. She threw away the motionless dust in the bin herself. What? Without a wheelchair, without a cane, she walked briskly over to the trash can. Amelia pushed me to the corner of the hallway. Peeking out, it seemed my mother hadn't noticed us at all. She walked back to her wheelchair as if it was the most natural thing and sat down calmly. Passing by where we were hiding, Daniel entered the examination room and approached my mother, offering his hand. My mother placed a brown envelope in his palm. Daniel pocketed it, then pushed the wheelchair as if nothing had happened, taking my mother to the rehabilitation facility. "Hannah, are you okay?" I was dumbstruck, and it wasn't until Amelia spoke to me softly that I came back to my senses. It wasn't that she couldn't walk, nor was it that she thought she couldn't walk. She could walk, but pretended she couldn't. Amelia hugged my trembling shoulders and shook her head slowly. "Get away from home now. Escape from your mother." Following her advice, I finished packing to escape from my mother. Throughout my story, my mother was silent. Then, a deep sigh came through the phone, and she began to speak the truth, as if she could no longer deny it. "It's true that I was in a traffic accident and was injured badly enough to need care. But thanks to rehabilitation, I could walk with a cane 2 years after the accident." Hearing this, I was shocked. Just 2 years to recover? Then what was the 10 years I spent caring for my mother? "But I was afraid that if you knew I could walk, you would leave me, Hannah. I couldn't bear that," she selfishly claimed. I knew very well from her daily behavior that my mother doted on me. so she made me take care of her, binding me so I couldn't go anywhere. I love you more than anyone. I was lonely. Even after being told so many times by my mother, my heart remained unmoved. For these 10 years, many of my colleagues at work have been promoted and some have gotten married. I gave up my career and marriage for you, Mom. I've essentially wasted 10 years. Why did you lie and make me take care of you? I kept in touch and came home on my days off. Why did it have to come to this? As I accused my mother, tears began to overflow, and finally, I told her that I had no intention of taking care of her anymore. And in the end, I'm leaving home today. Don't ever contact me again, I said, rejecting my mother. My mother was still ranting incoherently, but I cut off the call without paying any attention. A month later, living alone again, I was at a certain hospital. I was about to leave after my appointment. A familiar figure rushed towards me. It was Daniel, who was supposed to be my mother's doctor. He looked more haggard than I remembered, his cheeks sunken and fatigue emanating from his entire body. Wondering why he was at this hospital, I was about to refuse to talk, but he approached me with such desperation that I reluctantly listened. Then, he confessed that he had known all along that my mother's legs were healed, and had diagnosed her as physically disabled in exchange for money from her. The envelope my mother gave him that day had also contained cash. He had been fired shortly after Amelia reported him to the hospital. Furthermore, he was about to be arrested for continuously falsifying medical records, and his medical license was almost certainly going to be revoked. However, he insisted, "I've done nothing wrong." Incredibly, Daniel claimed that the money was not a gratuity from my mother, but hush money from me. He said I had planned to defraud disability pensions by making my mother appear disabled, and had coerced and bribed him into writing the necessary documents. Of course, this was completely false. It was Daniel who had extended his hand to my mother at that time. Unbelievable that he would try to shift all the blame onto me now that he was facing arrest. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything like that.
No, that's the truth. I'll tell the police everything without hiding anything.
Daniel shouted, his eyes bloodshot, and I turned pale. There was not a shred of evidence in Daniel's story. But it was also difficult for me to prove that I had nothing to do with them. As I was turning white, fearing being asked to prove a negative, a man approached me. He stood in front of me as if to protect me from Daniel.
You are the hospital's director, aren't you? Oh, excuse me. I have something to discuss.
At the sight of the man, Daniel's face turned ashen. He approached with a forced smile, rubbing his hands together, but the man frowned and glared at him.
What are you going to do to my daughter? What, daughter?
The man Daniel glared at was the director of this hospital and, as it turned out, my father, Brian. Yes, my father, who divorced my mother when I was young. Actually, my father was a doctor. After the divorce, my father had risen through the ranks and was now the director of a major hospital. He was also one of the people who had agreed to revoke Daniel's medical license upon learning of his deeds.
Oh, your family. Then please, let's talk. I was coerced by her to write the diagnosis. It must be hard for a father to see his daughter become a criminal, right? Could you please put in a good word for me?
Daniel apologized deeply on the spot and begged my father for mercy. But my father shook his head sternly.
Don't be ridiculous. You and the hospital, the administration, have all been deceiving a daughter who cared for her mother for 10 years. Madison to keep her daughter tied to her home, to receive disability pensions, and you to pay off gambling debts. You fraudsters deserve to be punished.
I firmly dismissed Daniel's appeal.
Damn it.
Realizing he was helpless, Daniel collapsed right there. The surrounding glances gathered noisily, and I could only watch his form with indescribable feelings. Then suddenly, I was yanked hard from behind. Surprised, I turned around, and there was my mother, standing firmly on both feet, with a terrifying expression. "You! What are you doing to Hannah?"
She screamed, glaring at my father. "Mom, why are you here?" "Because I knew Daniel was looking for you. I followed him. I thought it would lead me to you." My mother's obsession with finding me was intense, and it sent shivers of fear down my spine. "Give Hannah back to me. I won't let her go to someone like you. Hannah, let's escape quickly." My mother, screaming at my father, had an unprecedented, ferocious look. I shook off her hand and yelled, "Stop it! I know that all the stories you told me about Dad were lies." As I said this, my mother's expression changed, and she began to look unsettled. In truth, my mother had been feeding me lies since the divorce to prevent me from wanting to see my father. The stories about my father treating her like a slave and leaving her for a younger woman were all false. My father, an excellent doctor, had always been incredibly busy and knew little rest. Despite knowing this, my mother's attitude changed drastically after giving birth to me. She blamed him for his frequent absences and for the rarity of family vacations, and decided to divorce him, claiming he wasn't a good father. On my 3rd birthday, my mother suddenly took me and left the house. In reality, it was my mother who left, not my father. After the divorce, my mother received custody because my father, despite having a sufficient income, didn't have the time for childcare. However, my father had been sending a significant amount of child support every month. I had no idea about this and only recently found out after talking to my father. Becoming a single mother, my mother gradually became more dependent on me, and, to ensure I wouldn't go to my economically stable father, filled me with lies about him being a no-good man. My father had repeatedly expressed his desire to see me and asked for visits, but my mother refused, claiming I didn't want to meet him. There were times when a meeting seemed possible, but either my father was called away for emergencies or my mother would suddenly cancel for some reason, preventing us from ever meeting. I was told that my father had disappeared when I was young, but that too was a lie. The reason my mother didn't return to her parents' house as a single mother and managed to send me to high school and university was because of the child support and living expenses from my father, allowing us to live comfortably. So the story of my mother working hard late into the night for my upbringing was also a lie. In reality, she worked part-time during the day and spent her nights freely, returning home late to make me believe she was diligently taking care of me. "My proof is," my mother said weakly, "I can prove the child support and tuition I've been transferring." To which my father responded. My mother slumped down, utterly defeated. Seeing her like that, I realized I had been living in a world of my mother's lies since I was a child. I was shocked when I first learned the truth, but now I feel more anger than anything. "Thank you for everything until now, but it's over," I said coldly, and my mother clung to me. "Well, wait, Hannah, I did it all for you." "Not for me, but for yourself, right? You got a lot of money and pretended to be a struggling single mother. Was it fun destroying your daughter's 10 years with lies? I can't trust you anymore. Never get involved with me or Dad again." I declared our estrangement, leaving the hospital with my father, leaving my mother standing there speechless. Later, Daniel was arrested and his medical license revoked. He was imprisoned for repeatedly forging medical records, and the hospital he worked for demanded a large sum of money for tarnishing its reputation. Moreover, my mother, who had bribed the doctor for false diagnosis, was ordered by the administration to return all the pensions she had received, with interest, and was also charged with fraud. What life my mother will lead from now on is no longer my concern, as I have severed ties with her. As for me, unknowingly becoming dependent on my mother and being betrayed by her, I was mentally devastated and had to seek treatment at a major hospital. I reconnected with my father while getting a referral letter written. He remembered me when he saw my full name and was happy to learn he hadn't been forgotten. Currently, I have returned to work at the head office, balancing my job and hospital visits. Later, I met with Amelia, who revealed the truth about my mother to thank her, and we exchanged contact details. Being of a similar age, we now occasionally meet for coffee. It's refreshing and enjoyable to chat like this with someone other than my mother. I also regularly keep in touch with my father, reclaiming our parent-child time. I'm going to see a movie with Amelia soon. I haven't been to the movies with anyone in about 10 years, so I'm really looking forward to it. I reported this to my father during a dinner after work one day. He smiled gently and said, "From now on, live your life the way you want, Hannah." I nodded deeply. Going forward, I plan to live a fun and fulfilling life, considering my future.
Pretending to be a lifesaver for a few pennies? We're not letting you see Sabrina anymore. Susan said this as she shoved the flowers I brought for the hospital visit into the trash can. I felt like the world was going dark before my eyes. I looked at Trevor with a glimmer of hope, but just go away. Trevor, smirking in agreement with Susan, pushed me to the limit of my patience, which I had held back until now. "Gladly!" I shouted, and though Susan panicked, saying, "You'll wake Sabrina!" that was none of my concern. I left the hospital room and stretched mightily. I decided to cut ties with Trevor and his wife. Just thinking about it lightened my heart. My only worry now was Sabrina's future. So I decided to act on a plan I had been considering. I'll make them regret using the child, I resolved to myself. My name is Cordelia, just an ordinary 82-year-old grandma. Soon it will be 34 years since I married my husband Carl. It's my second marriage. My first husband passed away from illness when I was 26. My son Trevor is from my first marriage, and Carl waited to remarry me until Trevor was an adult. Trevor, often arrogant, is not what I would call smart, even with a mother's bias. Since his rebellious phase, his language has been harsh. When he first learned about Carl, then my boyfriend, he even called me names. As an adult, he has done well, joining a renowned company. Trevor, at 40, suddenly got married. Carl and I, who thought he would stay single forever, were shocked but wholeheartedly celebrated his marriage. However, his wife, my daughter-in-law Susan, looked at Carl and me with utter disdain. "Ew, remarrying at that age? It's gross how you still lean on men. Plus, you're not as pretty as me." "Hey, Susan, that's too rude to your future mother-in-law. But I guess I can't be helped. Mom has aged." They mocked us, and Carl was furious, nearly ready to strike them. Trevor and Susan left, ignoring my attempts to calm Carl. At the wedding, we were invited only for appearances. The event focused on Susan's parents, leaving us mostly uninvolved, serving drinks to the guests. It was then we first learned of Susan's pregnancy. Everyone, including Susan's parents, Trevor, and their friends, seemed unsurprised. Only Carl, I, and our relatives were shocked. No parent would feel good being treated like an outsider. We complained to Trevor, but he just said, "I forgot to tell you, and forgot that I forgot." Having been told that, I couldn't pursue the matter any further. Then, less than 6 months after the wedding, my granddaughter Sabrina was born. My first grandchild, and a girl at that. She was incredibly dear to me, who had only had Trevor. Susan still spewed venom whenever we met, but I stopped caring and even happily gave generous gifts for celebrations. I took care of Sabrina whenever Susan wanted to go out, teaching her how to eat and use the toilet. Having a tidy pension from retirement, along with Carl running his own business, I had plenty of money and time. But perhaps that wasn't a good thing. One day, when Carl and I finally had a day off and were about to go out, Susan dropped by. Trevor's family, having moved just a 5-minute walk from our house after the birth, often did these surprise visits. "Oh, Cordelia, dressing up for once. A pearl necklace on a pig, I see." "Susan, good afternoon. Criticizing someone's appearance right away isn't very polite, is it? Susan, initially annoyed by my comment, quickly plastered on a smile, as if remembering something. She then shoved her tote bag and Sabrina at me. I have an appointment and need to leave. So Cordelia, please take care of Sabrina. But I can't today. I have plans. That's inconvenient. It's probably nothing important. Cancel it. Susan said this while checking her mobile phone, and then showed me the screen. Look, my appointment is in 20 minutes. Bye. Just a minute. Susan forced Sabrina into my arms and hurried away. I stood there, dumbfounded, holding Sabrina. Carl and I had plans to go to the theater, but had to cancel and take care of Sabrina at home. The tote bag Susan left only had milk, a feeding bottle, and a single change of clothes, so Carl and I rushed to buy diapers and other necessities. Trevor seemed to be away on his day off, hardly answering the phone. Susan finally returned home after 9 p.m. I didn't know you'd be back this late. Yeah. Keep complaining and I won't let you see Sabrina again. Susan always used Sabrina as a shield when things got tough, knowing that I would give in. She showed no interest in how Sabrina was while she was gone and immediately took her and left. Susan, why do you keep leaving Sabrina with me if you dislike me so much? I feel like I'm being used, but it's better than not being able to see Sabrina. Carl and I repeated such conversations, sighing each time. Yet I couldn't refuse to take care of Sabrina, and this continued until she reached middle school. I often wondered where Susan went, as she wasn't working, but Sabrina didn't know either, and when I asked Trevor, he just said, "She's busy, unlike you." Living like this, when Sabrina finished her high school entrance exams, Trevor and his wife visited us, unusually cheerful. However, Sabrina stood behind them with a gloomy expression, giving us a bad feeling. "We want you to pay for Sabrina's school fees." Trevor casually made the request while sipping tea. The high school Sabrina was planning to attend was private and expensive because of the specific courses she wanted to take. We never thought it would be so expensive. Turns out it was your mother who advised Sabrina on this school. You better take responsibility. Trevor and his wife said this with a smug smile, showing no signs of distress. But Sabrina, silent and looking down, radiated a heavy atmosphere. You were the ones bragging about her going to a prestigious high school. Well, yeah, but the fees are just too high. We don't even understand this field she wants to study. At this rate, she might have to drop out and get a job. I understood why Trevor and his wife were smirking. They were confident we couldn't refuse to pay. I was furious, but seeing Sabrina's state, it seemed Trevor and his wife really had no intention of paying. We'll pay for Sabrina's school fees. Typical Cordelia, always understanding. Trevor and his wife were overjoyed at my words. Beside them, Sabrina looked at us apologetically. Trevor and his wife quickly stood up. Well, that settles it. They left, leaving Sabrina behind, saying they had other matters to attend to. I turned to Sabrina, who was left behind. Don't worry about the school fees, Sabrina. Grandma and Grandpa will take care of it. Just focus on your studies. Sabrina jerked her shoulders at my words and then looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. Grandma, Grandpa, I'm sorry. Dad and Mom won't pay for it. They just keep saying I should work. I'll do my best. She started crying. Apparently, Trevor and his wife were happy she got into a prestigious private school, but changed their minds about the tuition when they saw the amount a few days later. Even the possibility of scholarships was dismissed with a stern, no debts, just work. Then, the next day, Trevor suggested we should pay, leading to today. I guess it's my fault for raising a child who relies on parents' money. I'm sorry, Sabrina. No, Grandma, it's not your fault. You always told me not to borrow or lend money. Sabrina's words warmed my heart. Since she was often left with us, it's no exaggeration to say I raised her. I taught her everything, good and bad. Sabrina, unlike Trevor's child, followed my teachings well, involving herself in student government and growing into a wonderful person. Sabrina, tell us what you really want to do. We support your dreams. Thank you, Grandma. Sabrina perked up and started eating the pancakes I made. Carl and I felt healed watching her, but we knew we had to do something about Trevor and his wife. After Sabrina started high school, Trevor called to say she was hospitalized. Rushing to the hospital, we found she was in surgery. Apparently, she was hit by a car running a red light on her way home from school. The driver was caught and being questioned. Is Sabrina okay? Fortunately, her life isn't in danger, but the upcoming surgery is expensive, and not doing it might leave her disabled. It seemed Sabrina's knee joint was damaged, potentially preventing her from engaging in sports, which she loved. The surgery could prevent the worst, but without it, her condition could slowly worsen, possibly leading to inability to walk as she aged. However, Trevor was reluctant to pay. It's just a club activity, right? She's not going pro. No need to spend $70,000 on her. She can deal with it when she's an adult. Right? She can walk for now. We don't want to dip into our retirement funds. Trevor's appalling attitude as a parent deeply disappointed me. Nothing is too much for my dear Sabrina. Carl and I decided to pay for her surgery. Trevor and his wife didn't thank us, just seemed glad they didn't have to pay. Their attire suggested they weren't short on money, but they were always stingy with Sabrina. Carl and I couldn't make sense of it and contacted someone we had been checking on. The results arrived on the day of Sabrina's surgery, and I was shocked. I headed to the hospital to confront them with it. Sabrina, I'm coming in. Cordelia, please don't come in. As I opened the door to the hospital room, I saw Trevor and his wife inside. Especially Susan seemed in a very bad mood. Susan, what's wrong? Sabrina's surgery went well, right? Yes, it did. She'll need rehabilitation, but the surgery was successful. I was relieved at her answer and handed over the bouquet I was holding. Susan took it with a look of disgust. At that moment, I thought maybe the timing was bad, but I was soon taken aback by Susan's words. Cordelia, we don't want you to be involved with us anymore. What? What do you mean? I was stunned by this sudden declaration of dissociation. Susan crossed her arms and looked at me with full displeasure. Sabrina's education is being negatively influenced by your presence, Cordelia. A bitch who remarries shouldn't be around. How can you say something so awful? But it's true, isn't it? Susan mocked me with a laugh. I was filled with disbelief. But I paid for the surgery. Don't I have the right to see Sabrina after her operation? In response to my spontaneous words, Susan's eyebrows twitched, and then she scoffed. Pretending to be a lifesaver for a few pennies? We're not letting you see Sabrina anymore. She then shoved the flowers I brought for the visit into the trash can. I felt like I was about to black out. I looked at Trevor with a glimmer of hope, but... Just get out of here! Trevor, smirking in agreement with Susan, pushed me past my limit of patience. With pleasure, I said loudly, and though Susan panicked, saying, You'll wake Sabrina! It was no concern of mine. I left the hospital room and stretched. I decided to cut ties with Trevor and his wife. Just thinking about it made my heart lighter. My only worry was Sabrina's future. I decided to act on a plan I had been considering for a while. I'll make them regret using the child. I was determined. I learned about Sabrina's discharge from the hospital through a message from her. I replied, apologizing for not being able to pick her up. Sabrina probed if her parents had said something, but I couldn't tell her the truth about her own parents and deflected. She seemed to sense something but didn't press further. Using the information I had obtained, I continued my investigation. As more shocking facts came to light, I kept gathering evidence. Finally, with all the documents ready, I approached a lawyer and, together with them, made a sudden visit to Trevor and his wife's house. "What do you want?" showing up unannounced. I stopped Susan, who was about to leave, and forcefully entered Trevor's house. The house was adorned with expensive paintings and sculptures, screaming of newfound wealth. This decor doesn't look like someone who's struggling with money. Ugh, well, we need to keep up appearances when acquaintances visit. It's a necessary expense. Trevor stumbled over his words, making excuses when I pointed this out. I finally understood why they had always adamantly refused to let us into their house. They were spending money for their own vanity. Even though I had read the information I possessed and understood it, seeing it in person left me shocked. "Both of you, sit down," I commanded, and Trevor and his wife visibly panicked. I pretended not to notice and sat down in a chair in front of them. "What's this all about suddenly? I have to leave." "Me too." Trevor and Susan were reluctant to sit down, but Carl and I silently stared at them until they gave in and reluctantly sat down for the discussion. "Grandma, can I join?" "Yes, of course." When I nodded to Sabrina, Susan became flustered. "Sabrina, weren't you going out with friends? You'll be late." "No, it's fine. That was a lie." Sabrina admitting to lying seemed to be something Susan had never considered. She was visibly shocked, unaware of Sabrina's lies or rebellion during her teenage years. "Sabrina, how could you lie to your parents? I didn't raise you to be like that." "What are you talking about, Mom? I don't remember being raised by you." Susan's face turned red, and she fell silent at Sabrina's retort, apparently unable to argue with the truth. Trevor, on the other hand, was busy with his mobile phone, acting as if he wasn't involved. "Dad, Mom, I'm going to live with Grandma. I've already completed all the high school procedures. All that's left is to get your signatures." Sabrina said this firmly and placed the documents in front of Trevor and Susan. They looked at the papers with annoyance, but their faces turned pale the next moment and they looked at Sabrina. "What is this, Sabrina? What kind of prank is this?" Trevor exclaimed, and Sabrina began to explain with a mocking expression. "I already told you. I don't remember being raised by you. I was always yelled at for no reason, and all the household chores were left to me. I was never praised or even listened to." Sabrina's words caused Trevor and his wife to panic, clearly things they didn't want us to know. Sabrina continued, pointing to the signature line on the document. "Grandma and Grandpa raised me. They are my real parents. So I want that to be official on paper. Please, sign here." "What? I'm the one who gave birth to you!" Susan desperately clung to Sabrina, but Sabrina was cold in her response. "You just gave birth, right? You never made a single meal for me, and our meals were always just store-bought. Meals alone are never tasty. Grandma made all my meals and always prepared warm, delicious ones. She accepted me, even when I was too stubborn to be honest during my rebellious phase. You never did anything for me." Susan was left speechless by Sabrina's words. I think even I would be crushed if my own child had said that to me. But Susan needed to realize how badly she had acted. Prompted by the lawyer, Susan signed the document, and Trevor followed suit. "Well, it's fine. Education costs are not cheap. Thanks to this, I'll have more money to spend." Trevor's expression was strained, obviously just putting on a brave face. Susan looked like she was about to cry. Let's move on to the next topic. I said, and Susan glared at me with tearful eyes, as if I was the root cause of everything. It's about the money. What? We're not paying for Sabrina's education. You and Mom will take care of her, right? Trevor said defiantly. His comment, even from my own son, was the lowest. Trevor flinched under my glare, but didn't stop his bravado. Reluctantly, I ignored Trevor and continued the discussion. I'm not asking you to pay for Sabrina's education now. I don't expect that. But you two seem to have borrowed money from various places. What? How do you know that? Trevor and his wife turned pale with fear. I showed them the document. It listed the financial institutions and amounts they owed. Their lavish lifestyle had been sustained by debt. They were stunned into silence. We'll take care of Sabrina, but you two need to handle your own affairs. I doubt even selling this house would cover it, but good luck. No, wait! This was, for Sabrina's education! Trevor tried to justify. He must have thought if he claimed it was for Sabrina's education, I would pay off his debts too. I was disgusted by Trevor's thinking even now. Indeed, it was educational in a way. As a bad example. Gambling, buying brands in bulk, and other things. Sabrina is my dear granddaughter, and I don't mind spending money for her. But your parenting is over. She's an adult now, and it's her responsibility since she's married. Don't think of getting help from us. I said this while presenting a document to Trevor, which made his face even paler. Disinheritance? Mom, are you cutting ties with me as your son? This must be a joke. I can't believe you're still joking at this point. Trevor was in disbelief, probably never imagining that I would sever our parental ties. His hand on the table was trembling. Are you serious? Of course. I want to leave my money to my precious Sabrina. Trevor took the pen with a look of despair and signed the document with a slightly distorted signature. I stored the signed document and faced Trevor and his wife. That's all from me. Oh, and one more thing. Trevor and Susan looked up, their faces asking if there was more. I barely contained my laughter and presented a document as a parting gift. You both seem to have other partners, and you should settle things properly. Especially you, Trevor. You even have an illegitimate child in elementary school, right? Take responsibility. What? An illegitimate child? What do you mean? Susan stood up, raising her voice. Trevor, pale-faced, stood up to retort. And who's this guy, Susan? You've been betraying me all this time? I don't want to hear that from a man who's been making children elsewhere. Trevor and Susan were arguing, no longer concerned about us. Apparently, they both had other partners even before getting married, too engrossed in their affairs to notice each other's infidelity. I learned this after hiring an investigator to look into their debts. In addition to their own wasteful spending, Trevor was apparently using the money for his mistress and their child's living expenses, while Susan was spending on her lover. I was furious about their actions while neglecting Sabrina and consulted with Carl. Carl was equally angry, and we proceeded with discussions about adopting Sabrina. Maybe Sabrina isn't even my child. Don't be ridiculous. If it wasn't for Sabrina, who would marry someone like you? I clapped my hands to interrupt the argument. Sabrina was trembling beside me. Carl hugged her shoulder and took her out of the room first. Susan, that's not something a mother should say. Cordelia, it's all your fault! If you hadn't said that, Sabrina would still... I was astounded by Susan's attempt to blame me. You called me a bitch, remember? A mother who's been unfaithful during her marriage is the real bitch here. What? Susan's face turned bright red, and she was speechless. I left Trevor and his wife and joined Carl and Sabrina outside. Trevor and Susan ended up not divorcing and living in a small, rundown apartment, constantly arguing. Trevor's mistress had left him for a new partner, and Susan's lover, being a host, had no use for her without money. As a result, Trevor and his wife haven't divorced, but the trust once broken seems irreparable. They are both working hard every day, but it seems they have very little money left for living expenses. Therefore, they fight every night. And because the walls are thin and the noise carries, there are constant complaints from neighbors. We began living with Sabrina and have been enjoying a smooth daily life. Sabrina is thriving in her favorite club activities at school and doing well in her studies. She was recently praised by her teacher for her work in her chosen field and is excited about an upcoming presentation. Sabrina, skilled in household tasks, helps out when I'm not feeling well, and even bakes cakes for birthdays and anniversaries. She'll make a wonderful wife one day. Sabrina often says, "Please attend my wedding as my parents." Carl's current dream is to walk Sabrina down the aisle. I look forward to that day and want to live long enough to see it.